Good evening, everyone, and welcome to BT's Fly Tying Friday. Tonight, the 19th of January, Barry Webster from Texas is going to wow us with the Shakey Bealey and the two-bit Sally. And he's going to turn right around and come back on the weekly tip and talk to us about bullet heads. Hi there, we're the BTs from Boise, Idaho, and our good friend Barry Webster from Texas is joining us tonight. And Barry, we're going to be very pleased to have you here with us. Let's spotlight you, and we'll read your profile. Barry Webster lives in Farmers Branch, Texas, with his wife Teresa. He has two grown daughters and a college-age granddaughter, who is his best fly tying and fishing buddy, along with his golden retriever Wally. He's retired from the IBM Corporation after a career in technical sales. Barry has been active in the fly fishing area by serving on the boards of Fort Worth Fly Fishers and on the board of the Dallas Fly Fishers. He's an active member in both clubs. He has also served on the board of directors for the Texas Council of FFI. Barry just finished serving on the board of directors for Fly Fishers International, where he chaired the membership committee and served on the executive committee. He is currently on the Fly Tying Board of Governors, where he is one of the Whip Finish editors. That's the house magazine for the fly tying. A very good program, by the way. Good job, Barry. The chair of the 2024 Rendezvous Committee and the Buzz Music Library Committee. He has been an active demonstrator fly tyer at several FFI expos scattered around the country. Barry is also a member of the Roadkill Roundtable, a group in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that has been tying together since the early 70s. Barry, take her away. She's all yours.
Al, thank you very much. I've got a couple of different flies for you tonight. And Al, why don't we go ahead and pop up the menu for the Shakey Bealey. The Shakey Bealey is one of my favorite flies. It originates, I believe, out of blue ribbon flies out of West Yellowstone. And as far as I can tell, it was created by Nick Nicholas. But it has an interesting moniker in it that it is named after. It's named after a part-time park ranger named Frank Beals. And Frank was a furniture dealer out of the San Diego area, but loved fishing. And he took his summers off and acted as a park ranger. And the reason this is called the Shakey Bealey is apparently Frank got so excited about trout fishing and catching big browns and things that he would just kind of shake uncontrollably. And so this is the Shakey Bealey. I fish it locally for my warm water fish, and I tie it in a range of sizes. The larger ones winds up being a great bass fly, and tied in the smaller sizes, the panfish really like it. And there's just something about this pattern that is a great attractor pattern. It's designed, I believe, to represent an October caddis. And it's kind of loosely formulated on a March brown wet fly. But without a whole lot of further ado, we'll get started. You saw the materials list in there. I think the fly is most generally tied on a curved hook like the TMC 200R. And I really like it on that pattern. So get my barb crushed down. And I'm going to tie this with just some Danville olive, and I'll get started up near the point, or near the hook, or excuse me, the eye of the hook. And get that clipped off there. The first material that I'm add in is going to be some crystal flash. I really like this rusty brown crystal flash. I think it makes a good addition to this, but I'm going to take about 6 strands out and I'll clip those off. And I'm going to take and double those strands over. So I've got 10 to 12 strands that I'm working with. And I'll lay those on top of the hook shank. And I'm going to have the front end sticking out about a hook shank length. And I'll go ahead and bind that back. I'm going to take that and clip it off fairly short back behind the bend of the hook. And it's interesting when you start researching the origins of patterns like this, you can get all kinds of indications. I think this was originally probably tied with lemon duck as these next fibers that I'm going to tie in, but I've also seen it tied with partridge feathers at the back. I'm going to use some mallard flank that's dyed wood duck, and I'm going to just strip off a set of fibers and tie them in right above the crystal flash. And I'll bind that down. And this is all going to get covered with a dry fly dubbing, so it doesn't matter a whole lot on how you do it. Now I'm going to go ahead and tie in a piece of ribbing material. I believe Nick Nicholas originally just used a brown cotton thread. I've kind of fallen in love with DMC satin floss. I don't know if any of you have had any experience with it. It comes in a skein of about 15 yards, and it's got 6 double fibers in there, and it's actually a rayon material. And I got introduced to it when I was messing on the dark side, tying Atlantic salmon flies. And it is a very, very close substitute for silk. So if you're tying flies that call for silk and don't have it, you can use DMC satin as a substitute for that. And I think it makes a nice substitute. So I'm just going to bind that in and wrap it back to the attachment point back there. Come up, and I'll put that in my material keeper and get it out of the way. The next thing I'm going to do is build kind of a tapered body with this, and I'm going to use dry fly dubbing to do that. You can use whatever your favorite dry fly dubbing is. I've gotten very attached to FTD Fly Tires Dungeon Bullfrog dubbing. It's a nice, really long stranded fiber, and just dubs on very, very nicely. And you can either use an amber colored dubbing, or I'm going to use a light amber on this just because I think the ribbing shows up just slightly better. But I'm going to take some of that out and pull a selection loose. Dub these on. That started back at the attachment point. And I'm probably going to take a couple of shots at this. And I'm looking at building a tapered, kind of torpedo shaped body going up. So Al, this would be that spot where you would put your high-speed loop in to have it go very fast while I'm adding all this dubbing in.
Barry, I was just mentally putting away the footage place we are right now so I can take care of that tomorrow.
We were fortunate enough to be able to spend some time with Al today, looking at video editing, and we learned an amazing amount of information, as you always do when you get to spend time talking with Al. Okay, that looks pretty good at that point. I'm going to take my floss and I'm going to cord that up a little bit. And I'm going to wrap that around, just make a nicely segmented body going up through the dubbing. And as you can see, that brown floss shows up very, very nicely against that dub body. Okay, clip that off of there. All right, the next material that I'm going to add in is some orange ostrich. You can see I've got some Nature Spirit ostrich plume. And this is one of those, the bigger, the fluffier the ostrich is, the better it is. I actually sometimes substitute for flies that I'm going to use for panfish and stuff. I'll take either some orange chenille or orange cactus chenille, works very, very well. But we're just building a hot spot in here. And it also will help the wing and the flash stay away from the body as we go forward. All right, so I'm going to take that and bind it in here. And I do know how to wrap ostrich herl to make nice heads. I'm not necessarily trying to achieve that with this, but you get the impression I'm just creating a nice ostrich herl accent in there. Go ahead and pop that off. All right, and at this point, I'm going to take that flash that we attached earlier, and I'm going to bring that back, and I'm going to clip it off about halfway down the flash that I had under the tail. And I'm going to use my fingers and kind of bring that around and use my thread to bind it down. So you can see I've got a kind of a nice 360-degree set of flash on there. All right, the next thing that we're going to add to the mix is, hopefully everybody recognizes what this is. This is a Hungarian partridge skin. It is not dyed, it's the natural color. And you can see I have been using this extensively. And the good news is I'm going to use one of the longer feathers out of there because I want a kind of sparse, long hackle. And I watched a video this afternoon of Nick Nicholas tying this originally, and he tied the partridge in by the butt. And his comments were that, you know, it's a fairly delicate feather and it can break on you. I have very, very good luck tying it in by the tip. And in this case, that's a lot of feather. I'm not going to use anywhere near that much. And as a matter of fact, I probably got enough to tie another one with the residual. But I'm going to go ahead and sweep those back, tie that in. And if I were really trying to preserve it for another one, I would get in and snip that out. And again, that's probably enough for me to reuse on another fly. But I'm going to come in with my fingers and preen all those barbules back. And then I'm going to wrap it And probably going to give it 2, maybe 3 wraps, depending on this. You want a fairly sparse implementation of this. And so I've got that captured in there. We're going to just make sure I've got it bound down real well. Clip out the rest of the rachis. Use my fingers to preen that back a little bit. And then I'm just going to wrap in a little bit of a thread head in here. And I noticed that I've got a little bit more of the rachis showing there than I would like. If I were doing this to make it really pretty, I've got a feather burner that I'd probably take in there and touch to that tip of the rachis so that that disappeared. But for purposes of this, I won't mess with that. But at that point, you come in with your whip finish tool. And I'm going to do about probably a 4-turn whip finish, starting at the back and coming forward, tying that off. I'll do the same thing with a couple of wraps on a whip finish. And then clip off my thread. And I always like to give the fly a good flick like that. It kind of separates the fiber and moves them all out. And I like to use a little Sally Hansen's on the head of this. Just think it makes a more durable fly when you get those little bitty panfish or trout fish in there, popping that head loose. It allows the fly to stay together more. And so you can tell my good friends Dutch and Jack tell me I tie at the speed of sound. So I'll stop at this point, see if anybody has any questions or any comments or anything. But that's the completed Shakey Bealey. All right, the 2-bit Sally is a Charlie Craven's pattern, and those of you that have been around me know that Charlie's one of my heroes. I think most of the stuff that Charlie ties and has created are just brilliant. And this is a derivation of a fly that he's had around for a while. He had a fly called a 2-bit hooker, and it was a nymph pattern, and it had 2 tungsten beads on it. And he used it for places where he was fishing in a either very fast or very deep hole and really wanted to get down into it very quickly. And he was looking for a yellow Sally pattern to create. And he used this same philosophy of a couple of tungsten beads on it to allow him to get down very, very deeply. You can see it's on a simple scud hook. It's got a couple of gold colored beads, and these are tungsten. So you could certainly do it in brass. It just wouldn't be as effective in getting down as quickly as it would with tungsten. And in the sizes that we're looking at here, Charlie either uses a 2 millimeter or a 2.4 millimeter tungsten bead. And so it winds up with a fairly slender pattern. Al, if you would go ahead and transition back to my view. All right, there's a completed 2-bit Sally. So just put that in there so you can see where we're heading. Charlie uses some interesting materials in this. And in the interest of time and you guys not watching my finger dexterity and trying to get beads onto a hook, I went ahead and preloaded a couple of beads on there. And if you can see that, you'll notice those are slotted. They do not have to be slotted. We're not using that at all. And so they can be just regular round tungsten beads. These that I had happened to be slotted. So that's what I used. Charlie, this has a tail in it. And one of the things you could use is just a yellow microfibet type tail. And I do not own stock in Fly Tires Dungeon. You may think I do by the time we get through with this, but they've just got great products and at very, very reasonable prices. But Charlie uses something else. He uses a Webster paintbrush. And when I first saw his video on this, I ran out to my local Home Depot. And this is a Webster paintbrush. Now, it may not be recognizable to you there. What I did was took some needle nose pliers and peeled off the band of brass that normally is there holding this onto a wooden stem. But I started trying to mess with getting these loose from there. And I figured out that if you just peel that brass band off, you get an incredibly nice set of tail fibers. And I believe this paintbrush set me back a total of $12. And so if you look at the number of tails you get in something like this versus something like this is a great value product to use in there. And Charlie likes them because he thinks they're a little tougher and maybe a little larger diameter than what the microfibets are. So I'm going to get my thread started first. And Charlie, you can see in the recipe, it calls for like an 8/0 yellow thread in there. Charlie really likes the 50 denier nano silk and ties a lot with it. And I've tried it with that and it works great. I'm actually going to be tying this using, it's a Vivas 14/0 in yellow. So if you look at the materials list in there, we're going to create an underbody with the thread, and then we're going to create a wrapped body using super or supreme hair. And Charlie's list calls for a strand of the red super hair, and then I think he calls for 3 strands. It really doesn't matter the number of strands of the other hair, but he uses a yellow one. I have had the hardest time trying to find yellow super or supreme hair. I finally got some that I found, I think at J. Stockard, and I've got it on order. So it'll be interesting to see how that changes things. But I'm going to tie this with a yellow underbody with a white super hair over that, and it seems to work pretty well. Let me go ahead and get the thread started on here. And I'm going to tie in a couple of those Webster paintbrush fibers. I'm going to start out trying to match those up so they're the same length. And I'll come in and tie those in. And one of the things that we've seen on owl shows, and if any of you watched Dutch's session that he did a week and a half ago, which is now out on the Fly Tires group video, he did a session on woven hair, and Dutch showed a really cool way to separate the fibers for a tail using just your thread. I'm not quite that sophisticated. I'm just going to use my fingers and move those around. And I do try to get a layer of thread in there between those fibers to help with the separation. And you can see I've got those separated out there. You can really manipulate these things pretty easily with your fingers after you get them tied in. But I'm going to wrap those forward, and I'm going to stop a little bit before the beads and go ahead and clip those off. And now, Al, here's another segment that you can use your fast forward techniques on, because I'm going to start to build a tapered body in here that I'm going to wrap the red and white super hair filaments over. I'll go ahead and tie those in at this point. And for sanity's sake, I've already pulled these out and got them separated out. But you can see that these both happen to be Orvis brand, but I think they're probably Wapsi products. But you'll see them listed as super hair or supreme hair, and they're pretty inexpensive. So I've got, and you can barely see these, I've got 3 or 4 of the white fibers and 1 of the red fibers. So I'm going to go ahead and tie them in. Oops. Begin to bind those down back to the tie-in point for the tail. Put them up in my material keeper. Get these fronts clipped off there. All right, and I'm going to try to do this fairly quickly and build up a tapered body in there that I can then wrap these around. And you can make this as kind of fine or as fat as you would like. Probably if I was building a bunch of them with a fatter body at the front, I might tend to use something besides 14-aught thread, because as all of you know, it doesn't build particularly fast. But it does create a nice body in there. Okay. And in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and wrap these. Now, getting these started is a little bit interesting because they have a tendency to really spread out as you begin to wrap them. And so you need to tie them in there fairly tightly. And you may actually have to use your fingers to kind of manipulate them a little bit. And I'm not really that worried about how these are laying in. I don't want them to get wrapped all up, because I want the single red filament to come around each time and create a nice segmented body across there. All right, I'm going to go ahead and tie that off. And I think I'm going to try something here, see if I can zoom in just a bit. You can see how that created a really nicely segmented body on there. Okay, back out. All right, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add a set of, Next thing is I'm going to use a piece of copper holographic tinsel. And I'm going to tie this in, kind of right in there behind the beads. At least that's what I'm hoping to do. And I want to make sure that's up on top. And I'll go ahead and clip out that little tag. Okay, so I've got me some, and this is just straight copper Mylar tinsel. I think it would be better with a little of the copper holographic, but I just didn't have any of that in my stash. So I think it works fine with this. But I'm going to take a segment of synthetic hair. And Charlie uses yellow or shrimp colored fluoro fiber. I didn't have any fluoro fiber. If you look at the end results, this is actually EP fibers, and I think it works just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and tie this using yellow EP fibers. And I'm going to go ahead and bind that in there. And go ahead and bind that down up to the bead. And I'm going to build up a little bit of an abdomen in here. And I'm trying very specifically to not put pressure against that next bead, because I'm going to get some material in between those two beads in a minute. Okay, so I've got that bound down there, and you can see that I've got a little bit of an abdomen built up. And if you watch Charlie's video of this, he specifies 12 fluorofibers, 6 fibers on each side. For any of those you've been around Charlie a lot, you can never tell when he's being serious about stuff and when he's just pulling your leg unmercifully. I think he's pulling your leg unmercifully with that, but he looks like he does put 12 fibers in there and then splits them 6 and 6. That's a little too precise for me. So I've just grabbed a set of the EP fibers that are about the size that I think they need to be, and I've split them. And I'm going to take those and I'm going to bring them back on both sides of that body segment, kind of bind them down in there and bring them to the back. Now I'm going to carefully jump my thread up here between the two beads, and I'm going to try to fill in the gap, if you will, with a little thread, the area between those two beads, because I'm going to bring some more of that fiber forward, and I don't want that to get pulled down drastically between these two beads. So I'm just again building up a little bit of a thread ball in there between the two, so that when I start to bind my fiber down, it won't crimp it down in there between the two beads. Okay, that's probably sufficient there. So now I'm going to take, and notice I took the fibers that were forward, split them, tied them back. Now I'm going to take the back fibers, I'm going to pull them forward. I'm going to bind them down between those two beads. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to split them. And if I were Charlie, I would count how many are in each bundle to make sure they're the same, because I'm sure the fish check that. But I'm just binding both of those down on the two sides of that. So now you can see I have a bundle of fibers coming out the back, and then I have the fibers between the two beads. And that's not exactly what I was looking for. You want that Mylar to come straight back up over the back and up over the front. and somehow I let it slip off to the side. So I'm going to go ahead and bind that down just a little bit. Clip off the tag. All right. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and take my whip finish tool. Ooh, that was your thing. Okay, I'm going to take my whip finish tool and go ahead and whip finish right on top of that. And clip off my thread. All right. Now you can see that I've got 4 bundles of fibers coming down from this. And I'm going to apply UV resin to the body. And so I'm going to take a set of hackle pliers and drape those. Wow. Okay. And I'm going to take my UV and my UV light, and I'm going to begin to very carefully. The reason I have those fibers pulled down is because I don't want to cover them up with UV at this point, but I'm going to begin to very carefully coat the body of those super hair fibers. And ideally you come up over the top of the mylar. And you may have to do this in 4 or 5 coats. And I'm trying to be careful not to let that UV run down into the fiber segments in there. But I've got a pretty good coat on there. And I'm going to come in with my bodkin and carefully separate that out back into the 4 bundles of fibers. Okay, now I have those fibers riding out to the sides. I'll kind of preen those out, and I'm going to come in here with my scissors. And this is part of the art factor in this, of trying to get these kind of cut to the same length and the same angle. And hopefully you don't have to keep coming in and redoing each side, which shortens each side as you do that. But that is the completed 2-bit Sally. And let me put one back in there that I didn't goof up the mylar quite as badly on. You can see what that completed fly looks like.
Without further ado, we'll be moving in tonight to tonight's tip. And we are honored to have a fellow we've never heard much from in the past. Barry Webster is going to demonstrate to us about bullet heads. And that we got really excited because Gretchen and I do tie a lot of bullet heads. There you go, Barry.
All right. And I'm going to use as an example for this. This happens to be a Chris Johnson mimic hopper, which is one of my most favorite new patterns that I'm messing with. But Jack and Dutch and I were down in Chris's shop in Round Rock, Texas. And for any of those who haven't been down there yet, by the way, I do not own stock in Living Waters either. But Chris Johnson has a shop in Round Rock, Texas, that is the best fly shop probably within 500 miles. And Chris is just one of the nicest people you're ever going to meet, and is a featured Umpqua tire. And I believe this is now an Umpqua fly, but it's called the Mimic Hopper. And the only reason I'm using that is because you'll notice it has a deer hair bullet head. And I have always struggled with tying deer hair bullet heads. And as you know, you would do if you owned a fly shop, Chris had a new tool that he was using that he let us watch. And, you know, when you see that, you got to go get one, right? So I'm going to place a fly that is partially constructed. This is about 2/3 of a Mimic hopper already created in there. And what we're going to do is I'm going to tie on some thread at this point, and I'm just using a 210 denier brown thread just because it's easy to use. But we're going to get some deer body hair. Everybody can see that. And Al does a great job of explaining how to, you know, kind of select deer hair and trim a section. So, oops, sorry about that. I just cut a section of deer hair loose, and I'm going to do some quick preening of that, pulling out all the under hair, all the loose fuzzy stuff. And if you haven't seen Al do it yet, Al shows how to do a select. And Al, I forget what you call it, the first fibers, the second fibers, the third fibers, but shows you how to select and clean out those. So I'll let you watch other selections. I got to find my deer hair stacker. Okay. And I'm going to take and place that into a deer hair stacker. Well, that's fun. Always love it when it jumps completely out of the deer hair stacker, which it only does in demonstrations, right? But I'm just trying to even up the tips of those a little bit. And I'm not going to get too carried away with that, because that's not the point of our exercise here. All right, pull those out of my deer hair stacker. And Al, you've taught me better, but I pulled them out of the deer hair stacker the wrong way, so I got to turn them in my fingers. Okay, but I'm going to take and I'm going to tie those on here, and I want those to come back.
Barry, you need to get a little closer to the microphone if you can, or speak up, one of the two.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm going to attach these, and I want enough tips, because I'm going to tie them in facing forward, and then I'm going to use a bullet head technique to pull them back. But I'm going to go ahead and tie those in, bind those down real good. And I want to bind them down all the way up to right behind the hook eye. So I've got some body of that tied in here. And probably making a mess of that. I'm going to very quickly clip out. And then just make sure I have all that bound down. All right. Now we're at the tips section. This is a Renzetti bullet head tool set. And it is 3 of these little tools. And it's an aluminum disc that has what looks to me to be latex rubber, a membrane of latex rubber on the inside. And the tool set comes with 3 different sized holes in there. So they're all identical, just have different sized holes in the middle. So I've now got all that deer hair facing out the front of the hook, and I'm just going to take my fingers. And if I were doing this conventionally, I would be using my fingers to try to preen all of this back and get it back. And I actually did that. I probably did a better job of that than I normally do. But you can see I'm fighting with that using my fingers to preen all that back. The beauty of the bullet head tool is I take that, I push it onto the eye of the hook, I push that up and over the deer hair to the point where I want to tie it in. I bring it forward, that membrane pops forward. I simply take my thread and tie it down, and voila, I've got a beautiful bullet head. Now I have some, as you can see, I've got some loose fibers in there. They're loose. And if I used Al's technique of actually bending the deer hair over and getting all the links and separating that out, that wouldn't happen to me. But
Barry, that tool deal you just did is, there's every now and then an old tiger does learn, or old dog learns new tricks. And thank you, that was a great one.
Yeah, isn't that the slickest thing since sliced bread?
I'm stunned. It's time for us to move on to the next section. And that is the sharing section where everybody gets to kind of chime in with whatever they got going. But anyway, it's time for sharing on BT's Fly Tying Friday. First up, I'm going to share something just very briefly. I don't have any mock-ups or anything, but today I received an email from a fellow by the name of Ryan, and I haven't gotten permission to use his last name, so we'll just leave it at Ryan. And he sent me a muddle May that he had tied, that he had modified because he had some trouble with some of the steps. And I told him that we'd be sharing that at some point in the future. This happens to be the future from that email, but it also reminded me that I've had a promise out to tie a muddle May. And so one of these future events before the end of this season, we'll dedicate the hour to tying muddle mays, and there's several different configurations for it.
Did one today.
Okay, that's the 2-bit Sally.
2-bit Sally, yeah, because I was late. I don't know what I had. Something happened, so. But yeah, it was kind of hard because of the resin that was put on. It changed the whole look of the fly.
Okay, there you are. Now you can tell us about the body on that fly, Chuck.
Yeah, well, it's not tied very well because the brass wire used, but basically the way this fly is tied is just deer hair, and except for the tails, the Arctic fox, but it's just brass wire. You tie the tail in, and then you just tie the brass wire all the way forward to the eye. Then you come back in and put the second red in right at the middle by just reattaching your thread. It's just a very unique way of tying the fly. And it's weighted, obviously, when you're done. Like I said, I didn't do a very good job of getting the brass wire straight, but anyway,
it's also a very good way of building some depth to your wing.
Right, yeah. Well, it came out good. It's narrow. It's good and narrow. Very good. Thank you.
Well, everyone, we've had a great time this evening with all of you on Fly Tying Friday with the BTs. Please join us again next Friday. But for now, it's a wrap.